So, what are we talking about today? Adventure Realms, right here. Is this Dune Imperium with a retheme? Over on Gamecrafter, let's talk. So I start off the video with that comment because that's otherwise the elephant in the room. If you go over to Board Game Geek, if you see any mention of this game elsewhere, there are people saying that this is just a play off of, a rethematic reskin of Dune Imperium. Well, is that the case? Well, kind of, but not really. It's sort of like saying most deck builders are just Dominion with different flavor. And we'll talk about this in a minute, but let's go into a little bit more detail. So if you're not familiar with Dune Imperium, right, you're taking the combination of your workers, gathering your resources from one of the 20 different sites that are available to you on this board, using one of 3 different resources to manage a market or several different types of markets, depending on whether you're buying characters from a central market or acquiring items, and then using those resources as well as in combination with a 4th different resource of flags, which are going to benefit you on the combat dungeon track in order to receive the best resources and rewards from the monsters you're fighting each round, as well as earn potential ways to get faster victory points scored. And you're managing it through all of these different various worker placement sites. And as someone who is not a worker placement person, this is very intuitive. It works very well. It flows very smoothly. And it seems, again, at least from a layperson's perspective, relatively well balanced. But especially in the later game, though, I will say at higher player counts, there's going to be more of an issue because there are just going to be ones at the later game that are going to be more valuable than some of these ones that are maybe halfling or decent at the beginning of the game. That's probably the biggest criticism in some of the worker placement spots, especially on the main board here, less so in the guild area, which is more specialized, more all around, a little bit better, but also a little bit harder to play your characters in there in the first place. As you can see here on the table in front of me, you've got the main board setup. Now, full disclaimer, I reached out to the designer because I saw this and I said, this looks really cool. He sent me a copy with the expansions. And the expansions are also something that set it apart from the pure Dune Imperium reskinning or remechanistic approach, if you will. Because otherwise, the base game here with the base board is very similar in a lot of the phases and how you proceed through the game. If you've played Dune Imperium, you know how to play this one already, essentially, in the first place. You have your set of workers right here. You're going to be taking them through 2 different phases, placing them, gathering resources, and then, well, over here, along this track, the battle phase, if you will. Now, the battle phase is done slightly differently in this case, but again, very similar incorporations of said mechanisms in the first place. And so what you're doing in this 16-bit thematic incorporation of a fantasy realm is you have the places over on this side of the map, you've got your guild-specific areas and actions in the middle, and then you've got your fighting and victory points scoring over here. The victory point scoring is fine, right? Again, very similar, race to 10. But the fighting, the keeping track of, the winning the battles essentially is slightly different because you've got this deck that you're going to be pulling from here. 1 stars, 2 stars, and 3-star monsters that are going to be flipped up each round, and depending on who's highest up this monster track right here gives you the reward for subsequent places. And so that's what you're going to have to be dealing with on a turn-by-turn basis. The other nice thing, the other really unique mechanic here is that you'll see on the worker placement cards, because when you place a worker, you have to play a card to go along with it. The top ability here, or top reward, is what happens when you play it as a worker to a location. The bottom is a reward you get if you run out of workers and you have cards left in your hand, what you're going to reap and sow. And so the basic ones just give you nice straightforward stuff, but as you get to the more complicated ones, they start giving you more asymmetric abilities as you go along. And then how you choose which ones get played and which ones are saved and not played really matters. The expansion actually adds a corruption track, which penalizes the person who delves into the dungeon the least. And you'd think of corruption mostly being negative, and you'd be right, but now give a little bit of incorporation from Lords of Waterdeep with their corruption mechanic, because it's a little bit more nuanced than that, like most good villains in TV shows and series in the first place, where you can empathize with them, you can reap the benefits of it, but it's not just a pure detriment, because that's not how games are going to entice you to want to play them. So if you're the lowest one on said track in the first place, you get a corruption. You go down a whole separate board here alongside of things. And the corruption cards, as you go along, you know, you lose more resources essentially at the end of every turn. You become more corrupt because your heroes aren't actually adventuring. Thematic incorporation. However, if you reach certain levels of corruption as well, you have incorporation via your hero deck, because this expansion also adds heroes. And this is the other big thing that's really cool, right? This is a massive deck. And let me be very clear, this is not the whole deck whatsoever. So I've got a good portion of them right here. I take out the epic ones here for a second, but you can see right here that this is all asymmetric character cards, tons. So that's, again, a slight difference than what you're used to. The other big difference in this game versus Dune Imperium, besides the obvious thematic difference, is that this game plays a lot faster. It doesn't necessarily scale as well at 2 players as it does at 3, but 3 and 4, it's going to become a lot more cutthroat as well. And the strategies, to be frank, are probably a little bit broken in some cases. So if you're looking for more of a pure Euro-style strategic game, well, one, deck building is not going to be your strong suit in the first place, and you're not going to like that mechanic, but it gives you so many options and so many combinations that invariably, you know, someone might actually come up with a better combination than you. And how big of a make it or break it is that in this game where, you know, that is the core concept in the first place. Now, what I've done here for a second is I've overlaid both of the expansion boards in place of the main board so you can see a little bit of the differences as well. You have the corruption tracking board on this side from the last fantasy, and then you have on this side the time trigger expansion, which is going to give you different eras with different bonuses, as you can see, that are going to be able to be collected as you go along. And in both of these boards, you have different slots for cards that will be opened up and available not only to acquire on this half, but then to penalize you on this half, depending on how far down the track you are. And also with this new board from the corruption side of things, it offers several different worker placement aspects that are going to give you a slight nuance to go with the new corruption mechanic. It's going to offer you a few other ways to take one resource and turn it into another that isn't quite offered in the base game alone worker placement spots as well, to give a little bit more openness, which may not be of interest to you, but also to make some of the other spots just more viable as well. You can see here, just as a nutshell, what these cards look like. I mean, these are the areas they can go to. This is the cost it costs to buy. This is what it does if you use it in one phase. This is what you get if you do it in a different phase. And so they all are different. They're all different characters, names, colors, locations, everything you need to know. Now, obviously, again, the little flags here, that's the dungeon battling over on this track, just as a FYI. But, you know, again, in the lower player counts, this side of the worker incorporation placement is not tight, because again, like I mentioned, the smaller, faster rounds with only starting with 2 workers are just going to lead to that, especially at a 2-player count. You have essentially 12 places right here, and then you've got another 2, 4, 6, 8 in the middle. So you got 20 spaces for 4 people. So that's not going to be difficult. Again, there's iconography, but it's probably one of the better rulebooks and iconography explanations I've seen recently. And I've played Ark Nova and Earth very recently too, and I was more impressed with some of this than necessarily some of the others. And so it gives you a little bit of that. It gives you a whole nother magic deck where you're going to be drawing anything from magic spells to aid you in your dungeon delving quest to slay the monsters, to items that are going to, again, help you, as well as quests that are going to give you additional ways to score victory points. Treasures are also accomplished if you reach certain levels, heights on this dungeon in the first place, which are additional ways to score victory points quicker and at more, you know, massive quantities essentially throughout the game. So who is this game right for? Well, if you're looking for something that's lighter than Dune Imperium, if the Dune Imperium theme does absolutely nothing for you, give this one a look-see, because it incorporates the same style of mechanistic approach, but I know what I see, and it's a solid game. Like I mentioned earlier with deck building, how much iteration, how much difference do you have to call it one or the other? That's not a conversation that I can get into. I can't speak to intention. I'm going to tell you that, you know, with this game, if you want something lighter, faster, easier to get to the table, especially if the other theme isn't your jive, well, this one's probably going to strike really well with you. This one's also going to have more player direct interaction with some take that than Dune Imperium as well. And so if you're looking for more of that, this one is going to appease your fancies more. It gives you the same feel, it gives you the same play style, but it also doesn't overstay its welcome. And that's, you know, frankly speaking, the problem with Dune Imperium is, you know, you get playing this game, you could probably bust one of these out in 60 to 75 minutes easily. And again, at the lower player counts, it's going to be very amendable, but it's going to be very open as well. So if you're looking for something that's more cutthroat, yeah, at 3 or 4 players, it is going to be more cutthroat with the number of workers that's going out, especially after you recruit your 3rd one here. But at the same time, the randomness that comes from the deck building as well, with all of this, with the slight ability to cull. Now, there is some culling allowed. I wouldn't mind a little more, but that's probably the biggest downside. And, with all deck builders, there is some culling ability in this game, so it incorporates that as well. But it's a nice mix. It doesn't feel like you get pigeonholed into one strategy or the other. I'm going to go to this area, or I'm going to go to this guild, or, I'm going to just do this aspect. You're really balancing between all of them and adapting on the fly as a person who really loves the heavy tactical nature. Now, the other expansion, I haven't really had a chance to dive into it much. It's more of a time travel, time splinter-esque resource management that gives you more epic things, more heroes, more differences without necessarily adding too much, which again is very similar to the Dune expansions in a different way, but definitely the corruption mechanic in the first expansion sets it apart as well. So all in all, how do I feel about it? Looking at it right now and saying, okay, would I be okay with having both of these in my collection? Yeah, I think you easily could make an argument that this is different enough, especially with the theme and especially with the expansions, that the two actually diverge significantly. Now, if you only have the base games and you're only going to look at getting the base games, then you may have to choose an either or situation depending on, how much take that, how much scaling, and what your preferred theme is from your personal perspective, as well as what the group you play with prefers. If that's not a big deal, the other thing that has to be considered is because this is a gamecrafter game, it's more expensive. And so you're going to pay a premium price for the product in the first place. And we can't overlook that. But I think it goes back to what I said just a minute previous to this, is what's going to hit the table easier, because I'd rather play something that's going to hit the table easier and be welcomed with open arms because of a thematic incorporation, rather than a game that's not going to get played because it's maybe half an hour to 45 minutes too long, or just because it's half to 2/3 the price. I'm not looking for more games, right? I'm looking for more games that are going to get played more often. And so if you pay a premium for a game that's going to be a better fit, that's still a better argument, hands down, all the time. That's why on the converse side, I always say, don't buy cheap games for the sake of buying cheap games. Having 60 cheap games that you never play is just taking up space. And so this is the converse argument with this game as a whole, going through the gamecrafter now. But that's going to be the biggest barrier to entry, just knowing it's more expensive when an very viable, very similar alternative at the base game level is going to be more widely available broadly, no matter who you are. If this theme does nothing for you, if you don't want to pay more, if you do not like the 16-bit, because I know that's the other aspect of things, is I know people don't like this retro Final Fantasy style artwork that's incorporated on the cars. Personally, again, I don't care. Game stands up. The characters are all unique. I love the incorporation and the feel of the old-timey JRPGs. Does it really feel like a JRPG? No, it really doesn't, to be frank with you. But you know what? It gives you the vague appearance of it. And that's good enough for me as someone who grew up with Chrono Trigger and the Final Fantasies and the Secrets of Mana. And I'm okay with it from that side of things. All in all, frankly speaking, it's a lot better than I expected. Again, I can't discount the people that were saying, hey, this is really, really close to Dune Imperium. Can't deny that. But does it make it bad that it's close to Dune Imperium? Is Aeon's End and Astronites, being similar to other deck builders or even similar to themselves make you necessarily not want both of them because there are some slight nuanced differences? Yes. Does Dominion share some aspects with a lot of the other deck builders that have come subsequently? Ascension, anything like that? Star Realms based off of those? Yeah, absolutely. Is it okay for you, though? It's okay for me. But that's what you need to be aware of from this side of things. All in all, very solid game. Very, very happy with it. Not going anywhere in my collection. And that's someone who has Dune Imperium with 2 expansions as well. Because this is just going to be easier to hit. This is going to be more thematically enthralling for my kids than Dune Imperium. And so it's going to be an easier gateway game. And then if I want to, increase the complexity, increase the overhead with it slightly, they're already going to know how to play it as well. So then it's an easy boom to boom. So there you go. Adventure Realms, 2 expansions. Gamecrafter, they're actually doing a sale at the time of me filming this. So that's the other, win-win. If you're really looking at this, getting it for a slightly cheaper price, not the worst thing in the world. So there you go. Questions, concerns, comments? Let me know down below. Peace out.